You may.
I'd like to give the witness what has been admitted as a full exhibit, the most recent ISO New England electric generator air emissions report. And another full exhibit, excerpts of Invenergy's response to Conservation Law Foundation's first data request in the EFSB proceeding.
CLF 14 is Invenergy's responses to Conservation Law Foundation's first data requests, and it is 1.1. Is there any objection to it being admitted full? I can clarify this is in docket SB-2015-06.
Mr. Hardy, looking at Invenergy's response to Conservation Law Foundation's first data request, this is a copy of material transmitted by ESS Group on behalf of Invenergy to Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management in connection with Invenergy's application for air permits with DEM. I'd like to direct your attention to the last page of the exhibit, which is Table 1, entitled Potential Criteria Pollutants Emissions. Midway down, for CO2, carbon dioxide, there's a column indicating pounds of CO2 emissions per megawatt hour of operation for natural gas. What appears there?
781.
That would be 781 pounds of CO2 emissions per hour, per megawatt hour of operation. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's higher than your figure was in your testimony.
That's correct.
Just for operating on gas. And in the next column, there's a figure for what the CO2 emissions will be when the plant is operating on oil. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what is the figure in that column?
1,227 pounds per megawatt hour.
And that's for when it's operating on oil.
That's correct.
And how many hours a year has Invenergy asked for approval to burn oil?
I believe it was 30 hours.
Is that your testimony?
I don't know the number exactly.
720 hours a year?
720 hours, okay.
So you have a calculator. if this is a plant that'll emit 1,227 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour when burning oil, and 781 pounds when burning gas, burns gas 30 days a year, 720 hours.
You mean oil?
I'm sorry, oil. What is the weighted average of carbon emissions from this plant based on 30 days of oil and the rest of the time on natural gas?
Well, my first question would be, at what operating state are we talking about?
One of the advantages of this proceeding is that I get to ask the questions.
Okay, so can you define for me what operating state you would like me to calculate?
I'm asking you to calculate based on the figures that were provided to DEM by Invenergy for what Invenergy believed and told DEM its carbon emissions would be. Do you not understand my question?
I don't. Can you
Okay.
restate it, please?
Yes. Assuming a carbon emission rate of 781 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour, and assuming a carbon emission rate of 1,227 pounds when burning oil, and assuming Invenergy burns oil 30 days a year, as they ask in their air permit, what is the weighted average of carbon emissions from Invenergy per megawatt hour of operating?
And how many days or hours are we assuming it operates on gas?
We're assuming 30 days a year on oil and the rest of the time on natural gas. We're assuming 8,760 hours a year, 720 hours on oil as the air permit requested.
So 720 hours on oil and every other hour on gas.
Yes.
It's just under 817 pounds per megawatt hour.
Thank you. And in your testimony on page 19, you said 760 pounds.
That's correct.
Taking a look now at what is a full exhibit, ISO New England's Electric Generator Air Emissions Report, dated at the bottom line of the front page as being January 2016, and looking at page 20, the bottom chart on page 20. The figure in the bottom right-hand corner of that bottom chart shows the annual average CO2 emissions rate of all generation in the ISO New England footprint. What is that figure, Mr. Hardy?
726?
726 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour.
That's correct.
So even if your figure on page 19, line 22 of 760 pounds were correct, even if it were correct, that's higher than the average New England emissions at the moment. Is that right?
Based on this table, yes.
Yes. And certainly the 781 pounds per megawatt hour figure in Invenergy's DEM permit is higher than the New England average.
That's correct.
And that 817 pounds, which you calculated as the weighted average, is also higher than the current New England average.
That's correct.
When you prepared your April 22nd testimony, had you seen Invenergy's air permit application to DEM?
I had seen information related to it, yes.
Had you seen the permit application?
I don't believe I'd seen it in full, no.
Were you aware of the figures that Invenergy had submitted to DEM?
Yes.
I'd like to direct your attention to Mr. Parker's testimony. And I want to mention that I'm going to direct you to materials that are redacted. I'm not asking you to reveal what is in the redacted materials. And if you have any question about what I'm asking, pause for a moment before you answer, because I'm not asking for anything that is confidential. Seth Parker's pre-filed testimony on behalf of the division. Direct your attention to the chart on page 31 at lines 18 and 19. Ms. Wilson-Fry, does the witness have the unredacted testimony? Okay. So the chart, Mr. Ryan, at the bottom of page 31, lines 18 and 19, in the public version, those figures are redacted. And I'm not asking you to state or reveal what the redacted figures are. I'd like to ask, Mr. Parker reflects in his testimony that he was basing his figures in that chart on earlier testimony that you had made. Looking at Mr. Parker's chart, do you believe that that is correct?
Yes.
When you prepared, well, let me track that. When did you prepare the analysis that Mr. Parker relied on?
This was prepared in the weeks leading up to my pre-filed testimony on April 22nd.
And in that analysis that you did you use figures from the 2016 SELF report? That's an acronym, capital C, capital E, capital L, capital T, SELF report, published by ISO New England.
I don't believe so.
And did you use figures published by ISO New England reflecting the megawatts of non-price retirements and permanent D-list bids for FCA 11?
I did not.
Turning to your rebuttal testimony filed July 11. bottom of page 1 of your rebuttal testimony, you indicate that part of your purpose in filing rebuttal testimony was to show that your prior April 22nd testimony was not unreasonable. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Let's set aside whether or not your pre-auction analysis of FCA 10 auction results was reasonable or unreasonable. Your pre-auction analysis of FCA 10 auction results was wrong, wasn't it?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I don't know if there's an absolute answer to that. There were elements of it that were correct and elements that were not correct.
Did your analysis of FCA 10, were those based on Invenergy clearing both turbines?
Yes, it was.
Did Invenergy clear both turbines in the auction?
They did not.
Were you wrong about that?
Yes.
And with that difference between a seasonal claim capability of 997 megawatts and a CSO, capacity supply obligation of 485, have a material result on your analysis?
Yes.
And you were in this room on January 12th, testifying under oath before the Energy Facility Siting Board.
That's correct.
And on your slide 24, you showed projected savings from FCA 10 of over $4 a kilowatt a month in FCA 10. Is that right?
That sounds correct.
And that wasn't correct either, was it?
My revisions were lower. I don't think that the result of FCA 10 the result of FCA 10 did not give you a differential. So I'm not sure that question can be answered.
If somebody said that they projected the savings in FCA 10 from the presence or absence of Invenergy to be over $4 a kilowatt month, and in fact the savings turned out to be around $2.50, would you say that that's a material difference?
Yes.
Your rebuttal testimony, July 11, page 8. Question on line 25. Is Mr. Styxs' comparison of your pre-auction analysis with Mr. Styxs' post-auction analysis reasonable? And your answer, did I read that correctly, sir?
Yes.
And your answer, beginning at the top of page 9, line 1, you said, not really. A more honest comparison would be to compare a pre-auction estimate he made with my pre-auction estimates, or compare my post-auction estimates with his post-auction estimates. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you bold-faced pre-auction and post-auction. Is that right?
Yes.
To emphasize the fact that a reasonable person would have different estimates before the auction when they were guessing or speculating about a possible or likely future outcome, versus looking after the auction at actual real-world events. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in fact, you yourself revised your estimates after the auction when you knew what the auction results were.
Yes.
Mr. Hardy, in your expert opinion, was it reasonable for Mr. Nyland on Thursday, March 31st, to say to a meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Board that the estimate of savings from the Invenergy plant would be $280 million based on pre-auction figures, but speaking 7 weeks after the auction on March 31st?
At that time, yes.
You believe that was reasonable?
Yes.
Thank you. Looking at your April 22nd testimony, page 10, starting at line 13. On line 13, you say, for example, wind generation's intermittent and at times unpredictable nature requires flexible generation as a backstop. And then you say on line 16, the same is true for other variable non-dispatchable generation such as solar. See that?
Yes.
Is wind generation fully dispatchable in the ISO's real-time market today?
Is it fully dispatchable? Yes.
Do you say in your testimony that wind is dispatchable?
I do not. I believe I was referring to the day-ahead market. And also in terms of more so in terms of reliability, in terms of capacity.
And in your answer on page 10, where do you say that you were looking at the day-ahead market?
I don't.
And wind is fully dispatchable in the real-time market.
That's correct.
And the ISO is on track with FERC to make other renewable resources such as solar fully dispatchable by 2018. Is that also correct?
I believe that's correct.
Mr. Ryan, did you attend law school?
I did not.
Are you licensed to practice law in Rhode Island?
I am not.
Are you licensed to practice law in any other jurisdiction?
No.
Were you hired by Invenergy to render a legal opinion on any questions?
I was not.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Marcaccio, Mr. Wald, Mr. McElroy.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Mr. Hardy. I'm Mike McElroy. I'm a lawyer for the town of Borough. You're aware that the Resilient Rhode Island Act was enacted in 2014, is that correct?
Yes.
And you've made reference to the INDEC, the Tiverton Power, and the Hope Energy PUC opinions, but would you concede that this is the first PUC advisory opinion to the EFSB that will have to be rendered since the Resilient Rhode Island Act was enacted?
Yes.
Now, would you agree with me that in the INDEC advisory opinion that you referred to, the PUC was solely directed to determine whether there was a need for electric power, and they limited their opinion to that single question?
I'm not sure. I'd have to review it.
Right. So would you accept that subject to check? Do you know how subject to check works?
Yes,
All right, would you accept that subject to check?
yes,
Would you agree that in this docket, the PUC has also been asked to address in an advisory whether there is a need, like they did in Index?
yes,
But in this docket, the PUC has been asked two other questions, correct?
that's correct.
They've been asked, number one, whether the facility would be cost justified to the consumer, and number two, whether cost-effective efficiency and conservation opportunities provide an appropriate alternative to the facility, correct?
Yes,
So in this docket, unlike Index, they're not looking only at need, are they?
that's correct.
Now, on your direct testimony, your first filed testimony, page 10, lines 3 to 5. You've stated that capacity that clears an FCA is by definition needed, correct?
That's correct.
And over 1,000 megawatts of total new generation cleared in FCA 10, correct?
Yes,
And that included 3 proposed projects?
that's correct.
And 2 of those projects were new combined cycle generation, correct?
Yes,
Now, FCA 10 cleared less than 1,000 megawatts of new combined cycle generation, correct?
correct.
It was 485 megawatts for this project and 484 for Bridgeport Harbor, correct?
Yes,
Now, if FCA clearance is equal to need, as you stated on page 10, line 3, would you agree with me that even under your own reasoning, there is no need demonstrated by ISO for the remaining megawatts of the proposed approximate 1,000 megawatt plant?
you're referring to Clear River?
I am.
Under FCA 10, that's correct.
Still on page 10, I'm moving to lines 5 to 6. According to your analysis, additional combined cycle generation may be needed in the future, correct?
That's correct.
And assuming additional generation is needed in the future, ISO is under no obligation to issue another FCO to Invenergy, are they?
Sorry, issue.
I think you mean CSO.
CSO, I apologize, I meant a CSO, okay, the capacity obligation. In other words, if they bid in the next auction, there's no guarantee they'll get it. ISO doesn't have to give it to them, correct?
There is no guarantee, that's correct.
It could be given to some other proposed project.
Certainly.
Assuming that Invenergy does not get the award and it goes to another project, then the benefits that would be generated by that proposed project would still accrue to the Rhode Island ratepayer, wouldn't it?
That answer depends on where that project.
I'm sorry, I should have made that clear. Assume it's in the zone, it's in our zone.
If by zone you mean within, do you mean in Rhode Island?
No, I mean the newly configured zone that we are currently in.
The CNE zone.
Yes.
So if another project cleared instead of Clear River, in the CNE zone.
But not in Rhode Island.
But not in Rhode Island, then the benefits related to capacity prices would certainly accrue to Rhode Island ratepayers, but not the benefits related to energy.
Understood. Would you agree with me that the capacity benefits usually would be larger than the energy benefits?
Based on the analysis that we've done here, capacity benefits were larger than energy, that's correct.
Now, I'm moving to your testimony on page 22. Would you agree with me that Rhode Island's electricity load is served by power primarily imported from other portions of the ISO New England?
Say primarily?
Yes.
I mean, it's a mix of in-state generation and imports, yes.
All right. And whether the Clear River Energy Center is permitted or not, Rhode Island will still need to import power from other portions of ISO New England, correct?
Can you repeat that question?
Whether the Clear River Energy Center is permitted or not, Rhode Island will still need to import power from other portions of the ISO New England region.
At times, yes, that's correct.
Now, on page 29, I'm not going to direct your attention to a particular line, just your economic impact analysis.
Yes,
Now, you did this analysis assuming that the entire approximate 1,000 megawatt facility would be accepted in the previous auction, correct?
that's correct.
And as Mr. Elmer pointed out, your assumption in that regard was incorrect.
Yes.
Yes. Have you redone this entire jobs analysis using the 485 megawatts alone?
We have not.
Is there any reason why you have not?
Our analysis is based on the expectation that the second part of Clear River clears FCA 11.
But there is absolutely no guarantee that it will, is there?
There is no guarantee.
So the commission right now, looking at your numbers in terms of economic impact, is looking at speculative numbers. Because whether or not it will clear in the next auction is purely speculative right now, isn't it?
There is no certainty that it will clear, yes, that's correct. Our analysis is based on a forecast of future events and future assumptions.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Ms. Wilson-Fries?
Good afternoon, Mr. Hardy.
Good afternoon.
When you did your cost analysis, did the costs that you ran include the cost of all permits in compliance with regional greenhouse gas initiatives and other environmental requirements?
Yes.
And I have a record request for Invenergy, which is a listing and the status of all permits. And Commissioner G. Simone did that prior to render his decision, so that was a record request one.
Prior to rendering my advisory opinion.
Yeah, because you're not deciding anything. And Mr. Nyland, in his testimony, referenced the firm gas supply. Did you have a chance to look at Mr. Nyland's testimony?
I did.
Okay. Did you consider those costs in your models?
We evaluate the facility based on both a scenario that looked at firm gas supply and then also a scenario that looked at interruptible, so no firm supply. The numbers that are in my testimony reflect interruptible gas.
Why?
It was a conservative estimate on our side because there currently is no firm gas supply agreement at the facility. So we looked at it based on interruptible supply.
Okay, and if just for the record, you could explain the difference between interruptible gas supply and firm gas supply.
Sure. So at a high level, if you have firm gas supply, you typically would pay a fixed charge on an annual basis, and that gives you what amounts to a more, not quite a guarantee, but the ability to source gas in advance of users that do not have firm gas supply. Typically, at the highest level, you're paying a fixed charge, but then the variable cost of your gas is lower. And so for interruptible gas supply, you would source gas after those that have firm commitments. There would be virtually no fixed charge. The variable cost of that gas would
you have, so wait a minute, let me make sure I heard it right. If you have firm supply, that would be more expensive?
Not necessarily. It sort of depends. The primary advantage of having a firm gas supply is that if the system gets very tight, so if there's congestion, interruptible customers can be curtailed, so they may not be able to source gas. Whereas if you have firm gas, then there is more likely that you will always be able to source gas from the
And you wouldn't pay a premium for that, for the pipeline?
You would pay a fixed charge. Yes.
And with interruptible, you would only pay when the gas is flowing?
That's correct.
Okay. And so why do you say that basing your models on an interruptible supply is more conservative?
Because on a variable basis, the dispatch cost for Clear River on interruptible gas would be slightly higher. So all else equal, Clear River will run less on interruptible gas than it would run on firm gas. And so its impact on the system as it relates to energy prices and ultimately ratepayer impacts would be smaller.
All right,
A small housekeeping matter.
sure.
If it helps the schedule, and if Mr. Hardy is done, and if it comports with what the commission wants, we could probably put on Mr. Fagan starting this afternoon, rather than tomorrow morning without too much disruption.
That would be greatly appreciated. Is that okay with you, Mr. Shore? Are you prepared? Okay, you sure? Okay. All right, we'll be back at 2.
Do you please forgive me, because I wasn't writing them down. Could you just turn on your microphone, please? Okay, so, I think the last, thing you said was that if you have firm supply, you would expect to run more, or maybe you said the inverse, that if you had interruptible supply, you would run less?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So with firm gas supply, all else equal, you would be expected to run more than you would on.
Okay. And how does that benefit, Rhode Island ratepayers?
So the energy from Clear River, when the plant is operating, it's displacing higher cost electricity and higher emitting in terms of pollutants, electric generation. So all else equal, the more generation out of Clear River, the lower energy prices will be.
And so which one is more reliable, a generator with firm capacity or a generator with interruptible gas supply, or doesn't it matter?
All else equal, firm gas supply would be more reliable because there would be less chance of being curtailed if the gas pipeline system were congested.
Okay, I think somewhere in the testimony it said that it's unusual for electric generators to have firm gas supply.
In New England, that's correct.
Okay, and so how do generators bid into the full capacity auctions and get a capacity supply obligation if they've got interruptible supply?
So because of it was, I think, Mr. Allen spoke earlier about pay for performance and how there are penalties associated with non-performance if New England is in a shortage event. So to the extent that you have interruptible, having fuel oil as backup is one way to ensure that you can continue to meet your capacity supply obligation if gas is not available.
Okay. If gas is available in a shortage event, would you expect, and assuming that the project has firm gas supply, would you expect more or less reliance on backup oil?
Less.
Now, you don't expect this generator to run every hour of every day of the year, correct?
No, that's correct.
All right. What do you expect over the course of the year, it's not just.
Yeah, so on an annual average, we would expect its capacity factor to be, in the 70% range. And just further than that, and we would expect it to primarily run on natural gas. Economically, we would expect no generation on fuel oil. In fact, it would probably only run on fuel oil to the extent that gas was not available.
Now, are there different kinds of firm capacity contracts for natural gas? Because I know, like, from what we do, residential heating customers, the gas distribution company tends to have firm contracts where they're gonna get the gas.
That's correct.
Okay, so are there different kinds of firm contracts? Like, if you have the firm contract, if the project has a firm contract, could they still be curtailed?
Potentially, yes. The likelihood would be a lot lower. And I would add too that in New England, primarily, if you tend to see congestion on pipelines in New England, it is primarily a winter occurrence because of the competition from residential heating. In the summer, which tends to be, a period of higher generation for power plants because demand is higher, there's less congestion in the system because you don't have the competition from residential.
Okay, so the fact that your expected capacity factor is 70%, would you expect that to, change anything about the calculation that you made in response to Mr. Elmer's question?
Absolutely.
Okay, why so? How so?
So, the calculation that is in my testimony that you referred to on page 19, which was the 760 pounds per megawatt hour. So, that was calculated based on our expectation of the dispatch profile for the asset.
Based on the 70% running time?
Yes, and also based on, the fact that the plant is going to run primarily on natural gas. And it will not always run with duct firing. So the calculation that Mr. Elmer had me walk through was the maximum CO2 output for the facility on gas, which essentially means if it's running at full load with its duct fired capacity as well. And that is a higher rate of CO2 emission than the plant is expected to run on average, which is my calculation of 760. So maybe to back